Thank you and good evening. Croeso a welcome to the Education Scrutiny Committee meeting, today the 29th of June 2021. This meeting will be recorded and made available to view via the Council's website, except for discussions involving confidential or exempt items. Therefore, the images, audio of these individuals speaking will be publicly available to all via the recording on the Council website at www.caerphilly.gov.uk. Can I ask the committee clerk, we have had apologies, I believe, and that was from Councillor Derek Harvard. Can I ask her, has there been any other apologies?
We have possible apologies from Mr. Darwin Davis.
Thank you. And can I ask the scrutiny officer, please, to take the register for members in attendance?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Aldworth.
Present.
Councillor Andrews.
Present.
Councillor Bevan. Councillor Collis.
Present.
Councillor David.
Present.
Councillor Farina Childs.
Present.
Councillor Gale.
Present.
Councillor Hardacre. We've received apologies from Councillor Havard. Councillor James. Councillor Jones. Councillor Miles.
Present.
Councillor Oliver. Councillor Parry.
Here.
Councillor Roberts.
Emma, here.
Councillor Simmons.
Present.
We received apologies from Mr. Davis. Mrs. Havard. Mrs. Ireland. Mr. James. Mrs. Millington.
Here.
And Mr. Weston.
Present.
Thank you, Chair.
And Phil Bevan. Found my way back in. Blasted sister.
No shit. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bevan.
Thank you. Right, we're going to item 2, and which is declarations of interest. So councillors and officers are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and/or prejudicial interest in respect of any item of business on this agenda in accordance with the Local Government Act 2000, the Council's Constitution, and the Code of Conduct for both councillors and officers. Thank you. So, are there any declarations? Okay. So, item 3 is to approve and sign the following minutes of the Education Scrutiny Committee held on the 17th of May 2021. So, just checking for accuracy, can we look at pages 1, 2, 3. Could I have someone to move and approve the minutes, please?
I'll move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts, and thank you, Councillor Farina Childs, there for seconding. Thank you. We will be asked to vote on this. So if you go to your show conversation, your poll will be showing in a moment.
It should be on screens now, Chair.
I'm very sorry. I'm having difficulty with, there we are. I can do mine now. Thank you.
That's carried unanimously, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so can we go on to item 4, which is consideration of any matter referred to the committee in accordance with the call-in procedure. Can I ask, Mark, have we had any matters called in?
No, Chair, no matters called in for this meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. If I can now hand over to the scrutiny member again, please, for the forward work programme.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just having difficulty with my camera. There we are. Members are asked to consider the forward work programme alongside the cabinet work programme as appended to the report, and to suggest any suggestions that they'd like included on the forward work programme. The next meeting is after recess for this committee. That's the 21st of September. As members will note, in the forward work programme, Directorate Performance Assessment Report, 21st Century Schools Band B programme update, Return to School and Advanced Learning Needs update scheduled for the 21st of September, which is your next meeting. So if members are happy, I would like to seek approval to publish the Education Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme as appended to the report onto the Council's website. Thank you, Chair.
Can I say that we have 2 suggestions, Mark, for the forward work programme? And if I could have Councillor Brenda Miles with her suggestion first.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to have a report brought forward on the response rate from schools to requests for school reports for the foster panel. I'm asking for this because I sit on the foster panel as a representative for Caerphilly Council, and my experience over a long period of time has been that I would say quite often schools are asked for reports to be presented to foster panel, but they don't come. Even after they've been chased, we still sometimes find there are gaps. So what I'd like to look at is to see whether, to what extent are schools failing in this obligation? Is there a pattern? Is there certain schools who are very good at responding? Are there other schools that are not so good? Or maybe are there particular difficulties among schools for providing these reports? So yeah, I'd like to see that on the forward work agenda when it can be fitted in at an appropriate time.
That's noted, Chair.
Thank you, Brenda. Also, there's a suggestion from Councillor John Roberts. If you'd like to.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Thank you, Chair. I note that we've got an item tonight on new curriculum from Wales and the implementation, and I know we'll be having more, but I'd just like a fixed spot for that more, please, and actually, have it in as an item on a scrutiny meeting. And I'd like to think as well that some of our schools are ready for it now, whereas others are not. I'd like to suggest as well maybe that if we know of schools that are pretty keen on it, that maybe we'd like to invite 1 or 2 in and talk to our scrutiny. Diolch yn fawr.
Lovely. I think both are excellent suggestions. Can we add them in on this vote, please, Mark?
Yes,
Would
Chair.
that be convenient? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I've noted both those inclusions, and if members can vote now, a poll will come up on the screens.
Thank you.
That's carried unanimously, Chair.
Thank you very much. I gather there's no members joining us by telephone, is there?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, So item 6 is to consider the following reports sent to Cabinet: the investment at Virginia Park, second satellite, and St Kenneth for Trinity Fields, 9th of June 2021, and the youth service removal from liaise and use of Crumlin Institute, 9th of June 2021. Can I ask, has the Cabinet report been brought forward for review at this meeting, please, Mark?
Neither of those reports have been brought forward for this meeting, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So if I could ask Councillor Whiting, Cabinet Member for Education, could you introduce each scrutiny report, please? The first one will be 7, Inclusion Compendium.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this report is about the Inclusion Compendium, which altogether includes the inclusion strategy, in addition to a range of standalone guidance and documentation, which underpins the strategy and is to be used by schools, parents, governors, councillors and partners to help implement and understand it. As members will see, it's a lengthy but extremely useful and important set of practical documentation. So what is an inclusion strategy? Members may be aware that previously the inclusion strategy was going to be an exclusion strategy. However, it was felt that focusing on exclusions was the wrong emphasis. And that's why this strategy has instead a focus on inclusion. And it's about ensuring that as much as possible is done to ensure our young people remain in education and only to use exclusions where absolutely necessary. I know that members will be aware of the effects of exclusion, and this ambitious strategy is very much about shifting the focus onto how to include children and ensure fair access to good education. This involves a focus on well-being and health and the underlying diversities that children have. It also includes building relationships with partners such as schools, the youth service, EAS, education welfare services, social services, and others to ensure that any issues that might develop are identified early and support provided before problems develop. We need to know the strategy is working, which is why monitoring and self-evaluation is built into the strategy and the compendium, and to ensure data can be gathered and evaluated. The compendium is also a set of living documents and will evolve in tandem with this evaluation and monitoring of what works best and what can be improved. Ultimately, this strategy is about, so far as possible, preventing circumstances and behaviours in children and young people from getting so out of hand that exclusion is needed, and instead to ensure that the behaviours are noticed early, understood, and support given. At this point, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to Sarah Ellis and her team for all of the work they've done on this over many months, and how they've placed children at the heart of their considerations. In developing this report, as members will see, the list of consultees is long and broad, including partners from several council departments, external partners, and of course schools. This report is due at Cabinet on the 21st of July, and therefore Scrutiny is asked to note the content of the report, and members are asked to provide their views as part of the consultation process. Any views expressed can then be considered and reflected in the final report, which will be presented to Cabinet. I believe Sarah Ellis would like to come in to present more information on this report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whiting. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me back again. I have to say, I think Councillor Whiting has stolen my thunder, really, but I couldn't have put it better myself, so thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to attempt to share a presentation with you, and apologies, I don't have any glamorous assistants with me tonight, so if I can share it, I'm going to look as if I'm not looking at you for a little while, because I can only see the presentation on the screen. If you bear with me, once we've finished, I will obviously come back to you and take any questions that you have. So can everybody see that?
Yes. Yes, Sarah.
Thank you. So I thought it would be useful to start off with a question about why. So why are we doing what we're doing? And I think the critical thing to mention that Ross has already talked about is our ambition. And you know very well from those several opportunities for me to attend this particular scrutiny committee that we have significant ambition for our children and young people. It's not just about our ambition, though. It's about making sure that we have really excellent practice embedded in the local authority to support our children and young people. So we recognise that to do that, it's really important to review what we're currently doing. That fits really nicely with Welsh Government direction of travel. You'll all know that we talked a little bit earlier about the curriculum was mentioned. You know, there's a lot of work going on around the new curriculum. There's also an awful lot of work going on around wellbeing presently, led by Welsh Government, looking at the framework for whole school approaches. So we want to make sure that anything we do aligns with the direction of travel of Welsh Government. We also want to obviously make sure that we keep well-being and relationships, positive, appropriate relationships for children at the centre of everything that we do. So how are we going to do that, and why are we going to do that? Well, we're going to build on existing working relationships that are already in place between the LA and schools. And our ambition there is to have an even more collegiate approach than the one that we have already. We need to recognise that there is existing excellent practice across our schools, and we want to build on that. We want to share the good practice that exists across our schools. Councillor Whiting mentioned exclusions, and of course this ambitious strategy is all about including children and young people, and by including children and young people and focusing on their well-being, we can target exclusions and hope to reduce the number of exclusions that schools issue. And you'll notice, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, a significant portion of this compendium includes guidance around exclusions. And by no means last, but last on the list there, consideration of the ESTIN context. We know the direction of travel for ESTIN, we know their focus, and we need to make sure that we bear that in mind in developing any work in the LA. So what have we done? We've developed a suite of documents, and you can see here from this diagram that the inclusion strategy is at the centre. That's very much you know, the detail of how we define our ambition for our children and young people. The remainder of the documents are much more practical and are designed to be used and developed by schools and the LA. So as an example, and I'm sure you've had an opportunity to look at some of the information that's been presented, but we have developed information for children and young people and information for parents and carers. Two different sorts of leaflets for both, bearing in mind that for some children and young people, the usual information that we might present may not be accessible. So we worked with Ian Elliott, the head teacher of Trinity Field School, and colleagues from the VI service to produce information leaflet for children and young people that would be accessible and able to be understood by those who have more complex needs. Similarly, the information for parents and carers, it's also important to recognise that not all parents and carers have high levels of literacy, and therefore we've produced information that would be suitable for those where that may be a greater level of difficulty. Some of the other documents that we've produced include, and I mentioned already, the exclusion guidance. So a significant level of detail around our expectations for schools should they issue exclusions. Obviously that aligns with Welsh Government guidance, and we are developing new processes to work with schools to ensure that we have a really close connection with the head teachers, that we understand the issues that they're facing, that we track our data really thoroughly, and also that we build in opportunities for intervention at different stages, again, keeping children and young people at the heart of everything that we do. And then just to mention one other of those documents, the Wellbeing and Relationships Toolkit, extensive information for schools to support them to think about what should they do. One of the things that we often hear from our head teachers is that, you know, they intervene, they support their children, and then they reach a point where they feel as if they're becoming stuck, and what they would like is information from other colleagues to support in terms of what next, what might we do next when we get stuck. So that relationship and wellbeing toolkit is providing extensive information for school staff. Really important to enforce that this whole suite of documents was co-produced by staff in education, and has already been mentioned, involved extensive consultation. So we've worked really closely with our head teachers in primary and secondary. We've worked very closely with parents and carers. We've worked very closely with children and young people to share this information as it has evolved over time. So we're confident that we've taken on board all the issues that the parents and the carers and the children and our partners, including governors, have shared with us to produce this range of information. So how are we going to embed? I think it's really important to note that this is just not about a set of documents that goes into schools and sits on a shelf. The idea is that we work closely with our schools now to think about how do we change the culture, how do we change the perception, how do we change our behaviour around children and young people. And so the plan is to work in clusters of schools to support with the areas that they prioritise. One of the documents is a self-evaluation document, so we would be able to support identification of the areas for development through that self-evaluation, and then work really closely with those head teachers and those cluster groups to embed this way of working. We intend to continue our work with governors, either through Governor Network or through schools, and it's really important for governors to understand and recognise their role in supporting the well-being and the relationship development for children and young people, and also their role in things like exclusion panels when we are focusing on that area of work. And we'll be writing some new training actually for governors around exclusions to support that work. And then we also want to review what difference we're making, you know, that really important so what question. So we've done all this work, we've linked with our schools. What difference is it going to make, and how are we going to know? And we're going to look at our own evaluation internally, we're going to look at the school's evaluation, and we're going to look at feedback from stakeholders. What do we think the impact is going to be? We've talked about collaboration. We want to focus on enhancing the collaboration with schools and partners. Of course, we are driven by our ambition to ensure that appropriate support is in place for children and young people. We want to improve the well-being for children and young people and those appropriate adult relationships. We will, of course, be contributing to improved outcomes for children and young people and having a positive impact on the rate of exclusions. I wanted to just finish with a quote from some of the children and young people that I thought really captured our thinking around inclusion. So thank you very much for listening. Be very happy to answer any questions or take any comments.
Thank you so very much, Sarah. That was really enlightening. And after reading through the comprehensive report, I can understand the hard work that went into it, the liaising with all the consultees. It must have been a very hard job actually to get it all together. But I'm very pleased that it's not been named exclusion strategy. It's now inclusion. It's a far more positive note on everything. And I want to thank you and everyone in your team that contributed. You've done a very good job. Thank you. You do have a couple of questions. Well, you have a question from Brenda Miles to start.
Yeah, can I just say first of all that I really welcome this strategy. I think it's a very important document, and I hope it does bear fruit and that we can monitor and evaluate the impact of it in schools. One of the reasons I think it is really important is because I I continue to have an ongoing concern about the way schools manage children with challenging behaviours. And I read a lot in these documents about a an individual person-centred approach, and that's great. And I totally agree with that. But it also worries me that when you've got someone within one child or two children within a classroom, that their struggles and their challenges often have a really bad impact on other children who have to learn in the same environment. And it's that aspect of it that continues to concern me a little bit, because I know that it's a struggle then for schools to put in place an appropriate level of support within the classroom environment to manage those behaviours, or even sometimes when necessary to take those children away from the classroom, because that often involves the teacher having to leave the classroom as well. And that kind of has an impact on the children who are left behind. And therefore, you know, having enough people just physically present in the classroom to deal with these things when they crop up on a day-to-day basis, I think is the very, you know, is the bottom line when it comes to schools. So we can put in lots of strategies and have lots of helpful documents in place. But I'm really interested to see if this is going to have an impact. If we can get resources into schools as quickly, you know, as possible, and in a way that means that other children are not disadvantaged. I'll give an example of what I mean is, I know in our school, when you start thinking about having to put one-to-one support in for one child, well, that's immediately a resource that becomes unavailable to assist with all the other children in the classroom. So, I mean, sometimes I feel like the financial support isn't really there for extra teaching assistance in classrooms where there are problems with pupil behaviour. So, I mean, that's really all I wanted to say about it. I think we can only kind of hope that, well, maybe not hope, but we can only trust in the good work that's been done, that it will actually bear fruit, and in the future we can see some evaluation documents coming back to confirm that it is having an impact. Can I just ask one other question as well? You mentioned in your presentation that you worked with VI service. What does VI stand for?
I do apologise, the Visual Impairment Service. So one of the things that we needed to make sure in terms of the child leaflets was that we were taking account of accessibility issues. And so we consulted with colleagues in the Visual Impairment Service around the layout and the presentation and the visual representation and so on.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you for your comments. I take those on board. I think, you know, I would just say that this is not something that is a quick fix. You know, all the points that you made are very valid. This is about cultural change, early intervention, engagement with partners, and I'm hoping I'm not being silly by saying to you, I'm very hopeful that we will come back to you in a year or so's time with some interesting information to share with you about how we're embedding this approach.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Phil Bevan.
Yes, thank you for that. As far as Cymru is concerned, which I chair the governors there, we've always considered inclusion is the best way forward for these young people, and the delivery we've got there, I think, is very good. I was just wondering whether you will be coming out. I guess so many governing bodies, but certainly you would be welcome at Cymru to come along and have a chat to the governing body there if you're available at some time.
Thank you very much. I would very much enjoy doing that, Councillor Bevan.
Oh, lovely. It seems that there's no more hands up for you, Sarah, but thank you very much for the presentation. If members could go to the recommendation on page 16. Members are just asked to to note the content of the report, so there won't be a vote on this. And we'll be moving on to item 8. If I could ask Councillor Whiting to introduce the report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. At the risk of stealing any more thunder from other people, this report follows on nicely from the inclusion strategy and is linked to and complements it in many ways. The engagement and progression, or NEATS strategy, aims to set out the council's arrangements and intentions to ensure that young people are able to positively progress into education, employment or training post-16. This strategy involves aligning the council's strategy with other local and national guidance, including the 6 priorities contained in the Welsh Government's National Engagement and Progression Framework. And these 6 priorities can be found under 5.4 of the report. Altogether, it involves a collective approach across the various relevant partner organisations to develop a keen understanding of why people are or may become NEET and the consequences. It sets out the varying roles and responsibilities of stakeholders inside and outside of the local authority, and an emphasis on collaboration and partnership working. As with any strategy, we need to know whether it's working and what we might need to change. And that's why there's a clearly defined criterion for success under each of the 6 priorities, an emphasis on the need to collect and interrogate relevant and accurate data. I'd like to express my thanks to Paul O'Neill, Paul Warren, and everyone else in their teams who've worked on this document. Like the inclusion strategy, they've put the interests of young people at the heart, and they've consulted widely with stakeholders across a range of partner agencies and within the council to ensure that the strategy is the best it can be. The report, like the inclusion strategy, is due at Cabinet on the 21st of July, and Scrutiny members are asked to note the content of the report and provide their views as part of the consultation process. This is to ensure that Scrutiny's views are considered and reflected in the report for Cabinet. I believe Paul Warren would like to speak on this report.
Evening all. Thanks so much, Councillor Whiting. Our NEAT strategy, we've revised, we've revamped, not because there was a huge concern around what our NEAT figures were, but I suppose it echoes, very much ties into what Sarah was saying about our ambition for all pupils. We always feel we can do better, and we wouldn't be satisfied until we had 0% NEATs at the end of, each academic year. So echoing what Councillor Whiting has said, the document itself, it really recognises the range of vulnerabilities, that can contribute to a pupil being at risk at NEAT. And it really, the strategy really goes at length to talk about a flexible approach to making sure that the pathway to securing success is right. And I know in the document it's got a couple of simple examples of what those pathways might look like. I think really in terms of what's new about this strategy, it's about this renewed sense of looking at maximising the opportunities and the partnerships, that take place to really see that are we doing everything that we absolutely can. And I've taken pretty much the same approach that I had with the attendance strategy a couple of years ago, making sure that this is an inclusive strategy where everyone has a responsibility. So we've really strengthened the tracking and monitoring of the work we do, looking at the impact of the work, making sure that we are all accountable. And we've done that through, increased look at data, looking at terms of the work, working with our partners such as the schools, Careers Wales, and the like. So, we're really excited about this strategy because it thinks, it's going to lead to greater success. Thank you.
Smashing. Thank you, Paul. Can I ask a question from me really, is whether or not there are, more behavioural problems are actually discovered on the transition to comprehensive or not?
So I think it's really important to recognise that transition can be quite a difficult, challenging time, isn't it? And I think from my own experiences of a primary head teacher, I know that when they're going from a period from being in a class by themselves, with their one teacher, to a big school, and they've got to navigate that, that's absolutely right. Pupils need support around the transition. And similarly, for some of our pupils, in terms of preparing for the world of work and for further ed, you know, there's got to be those skills and that support's got to be in place. So there's really a role for schools here around transition, you know, whether it's from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, because let's remember that if you're at risk of NEETs, we generally focus on kind of the older pupils, but you're at risk of NEETs much further down, obviously, you know, if you've got those vulnerabilities. But also in terms of the role of schools now, in terms of making sure pupils have the absolute right skills so that they are able to go on, whether it's an apprenticeship or traineeship, whether it's further ed or it's onto further kind of academic study. So they're absolutely, you are right, Chair. You know, there's a lot of work that's got to be done, and a lot of work does take place to provide pupils with the appropriate skills.
Thank you, Paul. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Warren at all? Okay, well, we'll go to the recommendation on page 262 then, and just that members are asked to note the content of the report and provide their views, of course, and there will be no vote on this, okay? Thank you very much, Paul, much appreciated. We'll go on to item 9 now, and if I can ask Councillor Whiting to introduce this report.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So this report is before members at the request of a member of Scrutiny, and is about the SLA or service level agreements of services available to schools and details about the level of purchase for the authority's internal services by schools. Members will see under 5.1 and in the appendices that there are a wide range of services available to schools via an SLA arrangement. Every financial year, schools decide whether they want to purchase. In this process, they can raise queries and review their arrangements. In 2020-21, schools paid £2.4 million for the support provided in some of these SLAs, and in many cases, the level of purchase is 100%. Members will have seen the breakdown of this under Appendix 4 of the report. This level of purchase is excellent, and together with the regular opportunities for schools to review and feedback on services, suggests that they're also successful. Arrangements are issued on an annual basis, and service areas must continue to respond to the needs of schools to ensure that this level of support for our internal services continues. Members are asked to note the report, and I believe Jane Southcombe may want to come in at this point to go into any more detail and answer any questions members have. Thank you.
Good evening, members. I'm happy to take some questions. The report originated at members' request previously. There was a request with regards to SLAs within it for schools. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Jane. There is a question for you. It's a little bit of a sneaky question, I'm sorry. We've given a little bit of latitude to Councillor John Roberts because it's his birthday and he wishes to ask you a question.
I'm intrigued.
Hello. First of all, we've had 3 interesting items, one after the other, haven't we?
Yes.
You know, one leading to the other, and thank you, Councillor Whiting, as well, for introducing them all the way that he did. Diolch yn fawr iawn. This has been snuck in, Jane, okay? I hope you don't mind, but the chairperson's been ever so kind with me. Really, we've been dealing, and we've heard like inclusion, well-being, accessibility, closing gaps, transition, and we're looking at COVID. I think currently lots of our schools are very reliant at the moment on the COVID grants given by Government Wales and the full support that as a county borough, the county borough has given all those schools. Some of the grants like to support staff isolation, extra purchases especially as well. That's supposed to wind down in September. I'm assuming if things continue, the grants continue as well. Do we know? And then we've got things like accelerated learning grants as well. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so with regards to the COVID hardship fund, you're right. As it stands at the moment, the announcement from Welsh Government is that will continue to the end of September. But obviously, you know, there is further discussion going on between local authorities, treasurers, etc., because obviously none of us quite know what it will look like come the end of September. So although at the moment, you know, Welsh Government are saying it's till the end of September, you know, I would suspect it will depend on how the world looks really when we get to September, or how Wales looks rather. So yeah, certainly at the moment there's a level of certainty for schools, so that they know they can claim against that fund with regards to additionality till the end of September. But there is a level of certainty post that. But as you're aware, there's new guidelines which are coming out with regards to schools for the autumn term. There'll be guidelines now which come out over the next couple of months. So I guess we'll need to keep an eye on that position. I mean, what I would say is you would have seen the out-term position for our schools at the end of the last financial year. Welsh Government was very supportive with regards to putting some additional grant funding in at the end of last year. So for a lot of our schools, the balances position is positive. So that is helpful. Obviously, you know, we don't, you know, schools will be coming up with their own plans with regards to spend, but that position is positive. With regards to the Alps funding that you mentioned, we actually had notification yesterday of the funding allocation which has come in to Caerphilly. I think it's 1.2 million, and schools were notified yesterday of their allocations now from September through to the end of March. And actually, it was a little bit of an increase on what we'd had for that same period last year. I think it's something like 263,000 more than schools had for the same period last year. So that's a positive. And there will be another 5/12 allocation for the period from April through to the end of August next year. So already Welsh Government have supported us with regards to additional sort of catch-up Alps funding. So schools are aware of that now and they can plan for that. But you're right, there is a little bit of a level, well, there is a level of uncertainty post-September. And I guess we just need to keep an eye on what the situation is.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much, Jane, you know, giving us a clear indication of what all the SLA agreements are. I think it's been most helpful for all of us. Does any other member have any more questions for Jane? If not, we will go to the recommendations on page 309.
I should say happy birthday to Councillor Roberts, shouldn't I?
Hey, saying it is no good. Sing it, please.
I wouldn't put you through that.
Well, members are requested just to note the content of the report. So thank you very much, Jane. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go on to item 10, which is the new curriculum for Wales implementation. Can I hand to Councillor Whiting to introduce the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And it would be remiss of me not to wish Penblwydd Hapus to Councillor Roberts, and thank you for his comments as well. So this report is for information and will be presented by the Education Achievement Service. As members will know, in January 2020, the Welsh Government agreed the new curriculum for Wales 2022 framework. The changes introduced are wide-ranging and present a big change in the direction of the national curriculum. Schools have been planning for these changes to their curriculum for some time, including through the difficulties presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. The EAS have had a key role in supporting the schools with this change and to develop their plans for the new curriculum. And so I'll now hand over to James Kent from the EAS, who will present their report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whiting, and thanks for that introduction into the paper. I think what I'll do is we will start with the main body of the paper on point 5.1 there. So just to reiterate those points that Councillor Whiting made, this is a significant change to the curriculum in Wales. We have a new structure where we have 6 areas of learning and experience, which replaced the traditional 13 disciplines, although they are integrated within. In each area of learning, we have identified the key concepts, the big ideas that need to be taught through the curriculum framework to support sort of disciplinary study. We have literacy, numeracy and digital competence still part of that curriculum framework, although the framework itself is now there to support schools, and they should develop that you know, within their own sort of framework. And then we have these important cross-cutting themes of diversity, careers, work-related experiences, and the UN Conventions for the Rights of the Child. So a very different looking framework. Now, 5.2, just a couple of things to point out here. As the bill for the curriculum for Wales passed through the Senate, there have been some areas of the curriculum have been strengthened in light of some concessions that were made by Welsh Government. The first is the strengthening of the understanding of the climate crisis, both in humanities and science, and also a greater focus around diversity and expressive arts and humanities. Schools will be made aware of these changes in September 2021, when some of the aspects of the curriculum framework will be tweaked. In terms of 5.3 to 5.5, what I then do is I've set out how we're going to look at the way that learners make progress through the Curriculum for Wales framework. So there are 5 what we call principles of progression, and what they summarise is the ways that learners make progress as they move through their education experience in terms of studying the curriculum, things like increasing their breadth and depth of knowledge within the areas of learning, things like making connections and transferring the ideas they learn in one subject area or one area learning experience to another, and importantly, that increased effectiveness as a learner. How can we support them to become increasingly independent and able to grow as learners through the curriculum experience that they have? And in terms of the way that the curriculum is planned, the curriculum has what they're called these descriptions of learning, and what they are is they are designed to support schools in planning what the experiences that learners should have as they move through their curriculum experience. If we then move into
James, just quickly, we're getting some feedback. I'm not sure if it's paper on your mic. I'm not sure. I wouldn't have thought it was with a headphone.
Could be my mic. I don't know. Yeah, apologies for that, Ed. I'll keep going, and if it gets worse, I might turn down.
Okay.
Apologies. So in terms of the draft school improvement guidance, number 5.6 here, paragraph 5.6, quite important here in terms of what the framework says, or what the draft guidance says about assessment information that schools develop to support learner progress. So the second bullet point there, learner assessment is to support individual learner progression. Local authorities and regional consortia must not collate and aggregate school level information, data to create specific local arrangements to share that information. So we've been doing this for a few years, we're familiar with this approach, but that's very much in the philosophy of this new curriculum, okay? That data should remain with the school and to support the individual learners' progress as they move through the framework. Alongside the development of the curriculum, we've also got the qualifications reform. So 5.7 and 5.8 deal with this in terms of where we are. So Qualifications Wales, who are the regulator of qualifications in Wales, are going through a 3-phase consultation process to determine what future qualifications should look like. Okay, so they did the first part of that last year and reported back on what we think that the purpose of qualifications should be. They are summarised in the 5 bullet points under 5.7. The second consultation, which finished back in April, was to consider the range of qualifications that we want our young people to sit at the end of this curriculum framework. Okay, and they gathered a huge amount of feedback across the system, and significantly a number from learners as well as from schools and education practitioners, and they will report back on the findings of that in autumn. And the final consultation, which will come in towards the end of this year, is going to consider the detail of both the content and the assessment in those future qualifications. And Qualifications Wales are going to publish that report in the spring term of next year. So what that will give is secondary schools a really good understanding of how future qualifications will be assessed to support them in thinking about the way they plan for their curriculum, because I think that's absolutely key, isn't it, that secondary schools will require the confidence of knowing what the qualification system is going to look like so that they can plan their curriculum accordingly. Then in terms of preparedness of schools, so I've mentioned in the paper here on point 5.8 that what we were doing prior to spring of last year, spring 2020, when the pandemic began, was we were checking in half-termly on schools on the basis of the 3 phases of engagement that we've set out in terms of what schools should be doing to prepare for the curriculum. So those 3 phases, very briefly, were an engagement phase, and in that phase we would expect the school and the school staff to develop a really good understanding of the new curriculum framework, okay, so that they are able then to proceed to the second stage, which is the designing, planning and trialling phase. In that phase, we would then expect schools to be thinking about how this new curriculum framework can be enacted in practice, and what that looks like in classrooms, what that looks like across phases, and then ultimately into that 3 to 16 continuum of learning. And the final bit then was the evaluating and preparing for next steps. Okay, so in light of these trials that we've developed around our curriculum, what have we learnt? How can that feed into the next phase of development that we take forward? So you can see there that in the summer of 2019 and in the autumn of 2019, on average, primary schools rated themselves amber across the borough in terms of what they considered their readiness to be. When we looked at that data again, a term later, we saw that had shifted, okay, that the more schools felt better prepared. And in terms of secondary schools, in summer 2019, secondary schools assessed themselves as being red. So that was, they hadn't had the opportunity to do any engagement work around the curriculum yet. And that had moved to amber by autumn 2019. Now, because of the 5.10 here, because of the challenges that were created by the COVID pandemic, one of the things that we did was obviously a lot of the reporting requirements we removed in order so that schools could focus on the pandemic and the response. They moved to blended and distance learning and things of that nature. So we've postponed that in spring 2020 in terms of the monitoring, and we're picking that up again now as we move into the summer term and into the autumn term as well. So one of the things that we then did, point 5.12, was we said, well, okay, there's been significant challenge through this pandemic. Has anything that we've learned through this pandemic going to be helpful in supporting us to move forward with the new curriculum? So we did some work with Dr. Simon Breakspeare, who is an Australian academic, and we encouraged schools to think about, well, okay, we've had significant challenge, but what are the key nuggets and the key learning points that we can take forward to support us to develop our new curriculum? And you can see there we've listed some of the examples that have come through our engagement with schools, with some of our networking with schools in terms of supporting that new curriculum framework. So examples here, the development of digital competence. Now, digital competence is a core skill in the Curriculum for Wales framework, and both staff and some of the provision for learners has, increased enormously in terms of the skill levels that are now being able to be determined as a result of the pandemic. So I think that's one thing that has certainly shifted forward, which will be supportive of the new framework. Some schools have tried a variety of thematic approaches. They've developed some quite creative approaches to verbal feedback to support learner progress using some of the technologies that are available. We've seen some really excellent examples of how schools are supporting learner wellbeing, which we know is both a purpose in the Curriculum for Wales framework and an area of learning experience. So I think there's lots of learning there we can take forward to support us in developing the Curriculum for Wales. And certainly towards the early stages of the pandemic and into the autumn term of last year, so the autumn term for 2020, we saw quite good engagement around professional learning, including for the Curriculum for Wales framework. So certainly some things there to take forward to support schools on their journey. As you can see from paragraph 5.13, there was about 50% of schools that have engaged with professional learning around the curriculum through the period of the pandemic, and clearly I would suggest that certainly in the spring term and through into this term, we've certainly seen good engagement around the primary sector. I know secondary schools have been, significantly challenged in terms of the centre determined grade process and the additional, work and so on that's created. So certainly a priority for us as we move forward now into the autumn term will be engagement with secondary schools. So what are we going to do over the next couple of terms to ensure that we're supporting schools to get through to the next phase? So I've listed there the bullets at 5.14, what I think are the areas where we're going to provide support. So clearly the school improvement partner is going to be a key link for the school in sort of looking at what their needs are and how we can best support them going forward. We've already provided schools with some example school development planning information to support schools in thinking about self-evaluation and what they need to do next in terms of curriculum for Wales. We've got a variety of professional learning programmes on offer, both for senior leaders, head teachers, middle leaders and teachers, structured programmes that take them through the whole process of curriculum design and development. We've got professional learning for HLTAs and TAs as well. We've got our secondary curriculum design network, which is looking at some of the challenges faced by secondary schools around aspects of timetabling and how we can think more creatively about how we can plan time around the new curriculum, which is supported by a variety of experts. We've got areas of learning experience subject networks that are looking at how the new curriculum looks from an AOLE perspective, from an area learning experience perspective. And also one of the things that we will do is to provide bespoke support where needs emerge and where that intelligence comes from the school improvement partner to support individual school development. And we're also running regular update sessions for governors as well to keep them in the loop in terms of what the expectations are and how we can best support schools as we move forward. Okay, so just to finish then, if we look at a couple of the key risks, we know that the pandemic has meant engagement around this particular aspect of work has been patchy. Some schools have managed to engage and keep some of that development going, others haven't, and will require greater support as we move forward without question. And I think the biggest risk for me currently in the process is that what schools will now feel is that they're under pressure to fast track that development. And they're going to miss some of the important milestones in terms of that engagement, making sure that all support staff in school have got a good understanding of the framework and know how to support that planning work as we move forward. So I think those are the key risks. So I'll leave it there and obviously happy to take questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Kent. Councillor Phil Bevan.
I'm sorry, Chair, that I wasn't available for the pre-meeting. We've got a little problem up in Cumbernauld with COVID, and I was trying to deal with that. James, thanks very much for the report. Under the summary 2.1, it refers to one of the issues that was a problem when it came to the Assembly, then the Senate now, with regard to the freedom for the curriculum to suit. The head will be allowed to design a curriculum that suits their learners' requirements. And perhaps that was an issue that was causing a lot of concern, and people were concerned that what was a head going to do with his new power. Could he think in terms of the leafy suburbs of Monmouth, where maybe the Welsh language is not as high on the curriculum as it is in other areas? Will the Welsh language be protected under these suite of qualifications?
Yeah,
because I could head over there saying, well, I want to do this and I won't do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Welsh is a mandatory element of the curriculum framework. The proposal in the qualifications, Councillor Bevan, was to actually increase the GCSE Welsh to 1.5 in terms of the award as well. So actually, if anything, what we've seen is a strengthening of the Welsh language through the curriculum framework in terms of the expectations on practitioners and teachers as well. So I think if anything, what we're going to require there is significant professional learning and upskilling around the Welsh language. But yeah, that's a mandatory element, so it's a legal requirement as part of the curriculum framework.
Thank you. I'll have to keep up with this stuff.
Thank you. Councillor Brenda Miles.
Thanks. My question was about assessment and evaluation, and I think we've discussed many times before the fact that the usual sort of data that we've been having from schools is no longer going to be coming through, and it quite clearly says that individual learner assessment information should not be used for accountability purposes. But how then do we, as a local authority, how do we go about assessing whether pupils are progressing in school A in a similar manner in school B, so that we know that all schools are taking pupils to the level that their achievement is equivalent, no matter what school they went to? So what information should we be using to evaluate schools' performance?
Yeah, Ed, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, I was going to just say that it is a challenge for all of us. I think it's a challenge collectively for LA officers, those in the S, and for members, to explore the softer qualitative data. You'll also know that national categorization has been suspended for next year as well. Didn't take place last year also. So we are in a situation where this harder edge quantitative data is not available. And Welsh Government are dictating that it should not be, we should not put in alternative systems to collect data in forms. So we will need to work with everyone to collectively work out what can be used, but it is the range of qualitative data that is partner challenge advisors working in schools to evaluate the quality of leadership, the quality of teaching and learning, working with governing bodies to support that approach as well, looking at the quality of what is going on rather than assessment data, which at foundation phase, Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, and you'll have heard me allude to this, was becoming increasingly meaningless in a way, because it was random chance regarding pupils. All those pupils who could achieve those levels, as they were described, were achieving them. We will still have the examination system at Key Stage 4, and when that evolves as well, we won't this year, but in the future we will have that hard edge data of Key Stage 4, post-16 provision, routes into where learners are going and where they're achieving. So in primary, it's much more about is the provision right and is the progress right, rather than scores on the doors at the end of key stages at the moment.
Can I come in and ask Ed, do you think, do we know whether Estyn will be taking a more prominent role in checking schools?
The Estyn framework hasn't changed at the moment. They are looking to, they've paused again, but they're looking to start work in spring. Estyn have always, certainly under this framework, previous frameworks, they did heavily, it was almost weighted on those standards and those numbers that we saw. And if those weren't right, you couldn't have a good inspection. In the last framework, they've gone to look much more at the quality of work in pupils' books and the progress that's shown on their journey. And we would hope that that would continue, that it's looking at the quality of curriculum, the quality of provision, and the quality of what learners achieve relative to their starting points. And that's the approach we would take as well.
I think it's worth pointing out, Ed, as well, in terms of the assessment guidance in the curriculum documentation, one of the things that it requires us to do as a region, once the detail is worked out, is to work with, and it does state this to schools, they have to work within their cluster, and for secondaries with at least one other school in looking at their approaches to assessment, their approaches to reporting on progression. So it's certainly a process that we're going to be involved with. But I suppose what we shouldn't be doing is going away with the idea that schools won't be assessing, assessing pupil progress and won't have assessment data that they'll be using to make judgments about teaching and learning on a daily basis. We have a few schools across the region who aren't looking at a level system anymore and have started to evolve that. And what they're starting to use is some of the data they've always used around, for example, reading ages, and sort of aspects of maths proficiency, and the information they then give to the feeder school is around, well, here's what the learner can achieve, here's the skills they have got, here's the knowledge they have got, and here's the areas where they, you know, where they need further support. So, you know, that different approaches to assessment will exist, but, you know, we will be looking at that across groups of schools to support them in you know, in supporting learner progress. Ed, you were going to say something again?
I raised a physical hand rather than a virtual one because it was quicker. Just to add to that, there's nothing to stop governing bodies in any of this provision having that data. You know, as the governing body, many of you I know are members of governing bodies. The provision is about aggregating up it, but the provision of the data in useful, meaningful ways to governing bodies is certainly part of the process, and ourselves and colleagues in the LA would very much support that with the right development training for governing bodies.
Thank you, Ed. Is there anybody else with any questions for the EAS team? Oh, well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Kent and Ed.
Thank you.
We'll be going to the recommendations on page 347. Members are asked just to receive the report for information only. Can I also ask, before we close the meeting this evening, for a little, well, some of the members may not be aware of a COVID outbreak in Ysgol Gyfun Cwmrymni. Is there anybody who can give us any clarification on that?
Well, if an officer doesn't, I can. There are 45 cases. It started off with a lad who they thought had glandular fever, and it turned out to be the new variant. We have a problem, of course, with these big schools on buses. So all the buses were stopped. So that's 1,000 odd pupils are now self-isolating at home, and of course, the education system at home has been well tried in the last couple of years. So it's in the last couple of months, sorry. So it's just gone back in. Tomorrow there'll be 2 test units, one in the Gwyndy site and one in Geckley Harve, because the school has 2 sites, and they will be testing everybody. That's teachers, catering staff, caretaker staff, everybody, and all the children. We don't know what reaction there'll be from parents. There's a letter gone out from Philippa Masden to prepared by the health board to all parents, and it's just a question of whether the parents are going to risk their children going into school for a test, or whether they're going to keep them home and not know what's wrong with them. So they have a decision to make, which is difficult, but I suspect sending the child into school and having them tested would be the best way forward. I think that's it. I've been contacted by the press, but what we're doing is sending it all to Steve Pugh on the council for comment. I think that's I hope that's enough.
Yeah, that's lovely. I just wanted to, you know, have a little update for members who may not have heard anything on the news so far. So thank you very much, Phil. Richard Edmonds would like to come in again.
Thank you,
sorry,
Chair.
Not again, but yes.
my first statement.
Yeah, he's been talking all through the meeting, hasn't he?
I've been very, very quiet tonight, Councillor Bevan. Yeah, just to say, members, thank you, Councillor Bevan, for giving that update. For those of you that are elected members of Caerphilly, there is an update in your inbox from Councillor Marsden with a letter attached, as Councillor Bevan has alluded. So that's the position as it stands, but we'll keep you updated as things progress over the coming days. So thanks, Chair. That's all I want to add.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, well, that concludes our meeting this evening. So thank you very much for your attendance, and look forward to, well, let's look forward to